Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's ISW meeting, Independent Socialists in Wellingborough meeting. And I'm pleased to welcome Marlene Ballantyne, who is, in a sense, I'm not sure, you'll say what your position is, but you're kind of a spokesperson, or at least somebody who speaks on behalf of QTiP, which is Northamptonshire's organisation dedicated to working towards equality for queer, trans, non-binary and gender fluid people within all communities in Northamptonshire. And I'm sure, hopefully, Marlene, you'll explain some of those words to us, because I'm sure people, including me, are not totally familiar with what some of those words mean. But welcome to ISW. And if I could hand over to you, I've known Marlene for many, many years. We were, in our younger days, when we were much younger, we campaigned against apartheid in South Africa. So that just dates us, really, doesn't it? But,
it does.
That just shows how such a long while ago it seems. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and over to you, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, all of you, for inviting me, actually, for this evening. It's nice to have the opportunity to talk about something that is very important to me. So I'll give you a little bit of background about how I became involved in what I'm doing. So QTiP is an organisation that was set up in a different form several years ago. QTiP stands for the Queer and Trans Inclusion Partnership. QTiP was born out of what was called in the media the trans tipping point. You may remember some time ago, it wasn't really an issue in the media, talking about transgender issues. Well, certainly, I'll speak for myself, I didn't really understand what trans meant. I knew that there was a T on the end of LGBT, and I didn't really understand what that T stood for. Over the years, I became increasingly aware, due to personal events. I came to understand what T at the end of LGBT meant, and I had to educate myself quite quickly about what transgender meant. That was a journey for me, because I hadn't really thought about it ever. As Paul was saying, I've been involved, I've been interested, I'm of South African heritage, so equality has always been at the forefront of my mind. Before I even knew what woke was, it was, you know, something that was on the forefront of my mind: the equality, the lack of diversity, the vilification of minorities. So fast forward, since I've become involved in doing what I've been doing, and QTiP has mainly, it's come from working alongside, trying to work alongside other agencies, statutory agencies and voluntary agencies, and it has become much more of a grassroots organisation than it is now. So really, it's done things in reverse. A lot of organisations start off as grassroots organisations and then morph into something bigger. QTiP's been, the process has been the absolute reverse of that. So feel free to I don't want to bore you with the organisational structure of where QTiP came from. Suffice to say, inclusion and diversity is probably on the forefront of our minds quite a lot, especially if we are aware politically. But I still find that transgender issues are really poorly understood by most people. That isn't a criticism. It's really important that you understand that point that I'm making. It isn't a criticism, because if nobody talks about it and we don't see it, then we're not going to understand it. Transgender, do we all understand what transgender means? Is there, and the other thing I need to say is, if you've got any questions, please just ask me. I don't mind. I'm not precious, and I'm a founding member of the Stupid Questions Club. So please don't feel embarrassed if you don't, and if there's something that you don't understand, or if there's something you've been dying to ask, then please ask me respectfully, and I'll give you my honest answer.
Perhaps, Marlene, if I could just interject here, perhaps to explain what is trans. Assume for a minute that we all are at that stage of being ignorant about what trans issues is about. So stop, and also the video will maybe be seen by other people who have that question. So assume nothing.
Okay. So the easiest way to, I'll try and simplify it, because trans isn't one thing. Trans means moving from one state or place to another. So most people, most babies, when they are born with a vulva or a penis. And most people, most babies who are born with a penis will go on to identify as male. Most babies who are born with a vulva will go on to identify as female. Many babies who are born intersex or of indeterminate sex might have, well, it's not as cut and dry. So trans, as opposed to cisgender. So cisgender is when a baby is born with a vulva and is held up and they say, congratulations, it's a girl. Okay, so that gender that is assigned to you because of your physical attributes makes you cisgender. So your gender identity is in line with the genitals that you're born with, and that is how most people will grow. Okay, so that's cisgender. Some people will be born with a vulva, but they won't identify as female. They will identify either as male or as neither, non-binary. So those are the people that we call trans, because when they're assigned a gender based on their physical attributes, they have to transition, and at some point they will say, actually, you got it wrong. I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, or I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, or I'm neither, and I'm non-binary. Does that make sense? Please stop me if it doesn't. I don't mind.
Anybody? Marta?
Yes. What you've just, the definition you've given about cisgender is what I have also read about and sort of understood, but it just occurred to me that is it a bit problematic using the word gender if we're talking about wouldn't it be the sex that is assigned at birth? Because gender is something that is constructed, isn't it? That we grow to acquire particular characteristics, either of female or male behaviors.
It certainly can be. And there are a lot of people who would say that gender is a social construct, that it is something that we're socialized into becoming because of our genitalia. I don't know, is the honest answer. It could well be, and if I was to be pushed for an answer, I'd probably say there is an element of that. All I can think about is my experience. So I'm a cisgender woman. I have always identified as female. That wasn't a decision I made. It's just how I identified. There's a difference between how I express my gender. So being a woman, to me, is not performative. So I would still be a woman, however I express my gender, whether I cropped my hair short, whether I shopped in Burton's, Top Man or Top Shop, I would still feel the way I feel. So my identity as a woman is integral to my whole being. It doesn't change. So for me, I would argue that that's not the way I was socialized. That is how I feel. And the reason I conclude that is because growing up, things were often said to me like, that's not ladylike. And girls don't do that, and women don't do that. And they're the things that socially I either accepted or kicked against. So those are the things that I was socialized about, in the same way that I might say to my daughters, that's, you know, girls don't do that, or they would shout me down, obviously, if I did say anything like that. But that's the sort of, I'm a 20th century woman. So there's an awful lot about me that is about how I was raised and where I was raised and what influences I had in my life. But being a woman is something that I feel is not something that I was socialized to be. It's something that I feel that I am. And I confer that label on me. Does that answer your question, Marta? Was it a bit long and drawn out?
Okay. It's okay.
So yes, in a nutshell then, being a girl or being a woman, what you're socialized to is how that is expressed. It's not how you feel personally. That's how I feel about my femaleness.
And how does that apply to men stroke boys? What's the equivalent of, so that's cis male?
Yeah. So we all know that, I mean, I'm a parent. I've got 3 children. I would say that I gave all of them the same opportunities. One of them was a foster child. The other 2 were my birth children. They were encouraged to be their own people. I never ever said you can't do that because you're a girl. You can't do that because you're a boy. I didn't really, if I'm honest, know what non-binary was when I was a parent to young children. That hadn't crossed my mind. But as they grew older, I could see that the social pressure that they were under to conform socially to their gender. But so an element of it is boys are masculinized, and there's an awful lot at the moment, not at the moment, but there always has been, about toxic masculinity and how that is affecting our children. So when you're talking about cis boys and how they view their own gender identity, it's a difficult one, because what they might say publicly and what they feel inside could be two different things, and quite often is. I've stunned you all into silence. Does that make sense?
So what's the position then when, let's take a boy, could be a girl, but a boy or a girl, are outwardly and biologically have been defined as male, female, boy, girl. But inside they feel that they are not the gender that others are assigning to them, that they feel somehow as a boy, they are really inside and feel as though they are a girl. Is that what being trans, is that what trans is? That as they grow up, a girl will feel that they're really a boy, or they grow into adulthood that they're a man, and vice versa. That something inside is shouting at them, and has probably been shouting at them for a long while, that their biological gender is different from their brain gender.
Yes. So I think the term a male trapped in a female body, or a female trapped in a male body, is problematic for me.
Okay.
Because we are who we are, and nobody could ever tell me what I am. I understand what you're saying. When you have a child and you are raising them as a boy, you have to think about what being raised as a boy means. Now, a lot of younger trans people that I know, and I've been involved in a lot of work with young trans people in the last few years, they're not aware that what they feel is incongruent until somebody tells them. So you could have two children and they are doing whatever they do, but it's only when they're asked to define and choose that the attention is drawn to the fact that the thing that they're expected to say, I am, is not what they are. It's not, they don't fit into what we are telling them they should fit into. When they start to do things that don't fit into that gender, when they start to go to school and they've got to use that bathroom instead of that bathroom, when they grow a little bit older and they're having to stand up and pee when another child is sitting down to pee, that's when it starts to become problematic, because all of a sudden that child is being told that they're doing it, that there's something not right. And that starts very early. That starts with some children, it starts immediately. And it can be very confusing and damaging for a little boy, for instance, who doesn't want to stand up and pee. That's a strange example to give, and I don't want to trivialize it, but it's when they're told that they're not something. The only thing that, to simplify it, I'm a black woman. And like a lot of black people, we've grown up in a world that tells us that we are other, and that we have to try and not be who we are. We have to try and fit in, you know, that the images that we see, the images that we are taught to aspire to are not who we are, but we have tried to fit into that. So if you're constantly being told that actually that's not how you're supposed to behave, sound, dress, play, that's what you try and do. And if a little boy is told that you have to change because your behavior and what you're doing is like a girl, that's when their attention is drawn to the fact that they've got to choose a gender. If nobody ever said, what are you? I mean, there's a book I've got here. Are you a boy or a girl? And that's a book that is...
Is that a children's book?
That's a children's book, yes. It's written by Sarah Savage and Fox Fisher, who are quite high profile trans. They're a couple, actually. So in some ways, if somebody had never asked me if I was a boy or a girl, I would still probably be largely who I am inside. It's just that I would have to choose. And when you're made to choose and you choose the wrong one, that's when society has a problem with you. I'll try and answer things a little bit more concisely, because it is a lot. It's kind of a lot to take in.
Does anybody have a question? Any more questions for Marlene in this book? Maybe you want to move on to something to move on in the discussion, Marlene, or?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Can I just say in a nutshell?
Yeah.
Perhaps what we need to break it down to is that we don't need to be telling each other who we are. I am who I say I am, and when I tell you who I am, you need to accept that that's who I say I am.
So what you're saying is that we're not biologically determined. That our biology, in terms of our sex, is or our race or what have you, shouldn't be a determining factor about how we define ourselves.
Yes, that is what I'm saying, and that's borne out throughout nature. That's borne out throughout nature, that not everybody who is born with a penis will turn out a certain way. There are lots of different ways to be, and they are all okay. But in society, we tend to be quite prescriptive. And if you are this, then therefore, you know, I'll throw it back to myself again. When I was growing up, being told, yeah, but you're not proper black, like you're not black. Well, I am who I say I am. I'm a black woman. And nobody is going to tell me any different, because I know who I am. So that's what we need to get away from. If somebody comes to me and says, my name is Sam, my pronoun is she, he, or they, it's not for me to question.
Okay, so then we come on to, I suppose, the way society undermines that by forcing us to actually define ourselves different to who we are. That's when we come on to things like the way people are treated and discriminated against, or harassed, or bullied because of who we are. So is that when we now move from, in a sense, the self, the definition of self, to how society looks at us and treats us?
which is ever evolving. You know, one thing that I always and I hope I'm making it clear this evening, I don't speak for trans people. I don't know what it's like to be trans. I don't know what it feels like to have to say to somebody, to say to a parent, to say to a school, why are you making me do this? Because that's not who I am. I have never, ever questioned my gender. That is cis privilege. I've never had to walk down the street and have anybody throw violence at me because I'm not conforming in that same way. I have cis privilege. This is a subject that I can close and I can walk away from. It's not in the same way that I'm a Black woman, no matter what day it is, no matter what I look like, I am who I am, and I can never walk away from that. And somebody who's white will never understand what it's like to be a Black woman. So I speak from a place of great privilege in that it's something that I try to understand, and I probably I get it wrong all the time. I say the wrong things. I misgender people. I make assumptions because I'm not a trans woman. So where I'm coming from is that since I've been involved in this, I have begun to understand something that is fundamentally, the bare bones of it is how much I have and do discriminate, and how much we all do. I see it all the time. I see cis privilege all the time. So rather than try and unpick it, and rather than me try and tell you what it means to be trans, I can tell you how much cis people need to try and understand and make it our responsibility. If we believe that we are fighting discrimination, this is something that we need to be concerned about. It's not okay to not know. It is not okay to not be informed. I have had incidents where I have suffered hate crime, trans hate crime, because people have made assumptions because of who I'm with or what I do. I have had to scoop friends up off the floor. I've had to scoop family members up off the floor because trans hate is the last acceptable discrimination that people don't know about. And it's really, for a cis person, for a cis middle-aged woman, several years down the line, there are so many academic arguments. There are so many political arguments. Otherwise wonderful people who seem to have a bit of a block about this, who seem to have an opinion about how somebody else should identify. And I just wonder, I'm talking as a cis woman, I wonder why do we have to know? Why do we have to be prescriptive about other people? If somebody tells me they're a woman, I go, okay. That's kind of, you know, I'm reducing it there.
Okay.
I'm reducing it right down. But that's something, you know, there's a lot to know, and there's a lot that we probably won't ever understand if we are cis. I'm not assuming that everybody in this meeting is cis, but as a cis woman, there's a lot that I still don't know, and I can't say, I can't be prescriptive about what makes a trans person, about, you know, it's like, what does being black mean?
Has anybody got any questions at this point? Sue, Tony?
If there's anything that you disagree with that I say, anything that you are worried that you, it's really important that what I'm saying is my perspective.
Derek, Karen, do you have any questions?
Please.
Come on, you've got to have some
Yeah,
questions.
I'm
always
You don't have to, Derek. If
no, it's
I'm
been
not-
going
I'm
through
not
my head
pushing-
for some
I'm not-
time because
yeah,
I completely go along with what you say. You are what you say you are, despite what you may look like. And I would hope if anyone said to me, "Oh, I'm a man," but what I saw was a woman, I would treat them as a man or as an individual. I don't see any problem. I would have any problem at all in accepting what someone said they were. And it's like, or am I being naive when I say that? Because as you say, I have no idea what it's like to be trans. I have no idea what it's like to be a woman. But that doesn't mean they don't exist.
Absolutely.
And
You've
so
hit the nail on the head. You've actually hit the nail on the head.
why should I be offended by it?
and that's the rub, isn't
And
it?
that is absolutely the nuts and bolts of it.
But if you were trans man, Derek, as you look now,
Thank you.
but you would define as a woman, and you went into a woman's toilet, in inverted, a woman's toilet,
Yeah.
because you are a woman. What do you think people's reaction might be?
A lot of people would not like it. But again, that's not my fault. You know, we are brought up that there are two sexes and this is how they behave. And those sexes are defined by their physical appearance and not by who they are inside. I would hope if I were a trans man and I would have the courage to go into the toilets where I would feel most comfortable. But I don't know.
There's a lot of violence
Committed and
committed, not all of it intentional. But
I mean, it may not be possible to answer this question, but what percentage of people in the UK will consider themselves to be trans? Or don't we have those figures because we don't?
There are figures which I can send to Paul. I'm not even going to guess at what they are. It's not I'm not even going to get, I could guess, I'm not going to guess what they are. Suffice to say that most people are cis, obviously.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that being cis is normal, but most people are cis. And also, the thing that if you were, I assume you meant, is it Tony? Sorry. Derek. I assume what Paul meant was if you were a trans woman, as in if you were assigned male at birth and you identified as a woman and your gender expression was as you are now, that is going to be problematic. But maybe the problem is how heavily we rely on what gender somebody is, because I really don't care who pees in the cubicle next to me. I don't care. For me, toilet should be urinal that way, sit down that way, take your pick.
Yeah.
And I will go into a men's toilet if there's a queue in the ladies.
Yeah.
I don't even care. I don't care. If I need to pee, I will go and pee, and I would encourage anyone else to do the same.
Could I tell a story about that? When I was on holiday in Ireland, we went to a festival,
Yeah.
and there was a big, huge marquee, which were the toilets, and there was an entrance for men and an entrance for women. But when you went inside, all the cubicles in the toilets were the same.
Exactly.
They've still got a male and female entrance, and I thought,
Yeah, but this is one of the things that people
why not?
get hung up on. It is one of the things that people get hung up on. And what you've got to realise as well is that there are an awful lot of trans women that you would not know are trans women, because they conform to what we think of as female. You cannot police gender.
Oh.
There are an awful lot of trans men who you would not know that they had been assigned female at birth. And so when you're saying you can't come in here because you are a woman and this is a men's toilet, or vice versa, what you're saying is you don't conform to the physical stereotype and the gender expression that makes you a woman. That doesn't mean you're not a woman. Equally, I know women who are very masculine. They still identify as female, but they would probably get challenged to go into a woman's toilet. So you know, when you get that, is it okay for a trans woman to get dressed next to me in a changing room if she is performing femininity well enough? Is that the measure? If she's not performing, if she's butch, is it still okay for her to get changed there? If she's wearing a suit and has facial hair but still identifies as a woman, can she still get changed next to me? Because you cannot police it.
No, I mean, I think the problem I had, and I may be wrong here, Paul, but I was thinking you're asking what would I feel if I was trans going into a toilet which was not assigned to my sex. I don't know, because I'm not trans. All I can say is how I think and feel as I am now, not as when I'm someone else.
Of course.
I said I would hope that's what I would do, but I wouldn't know unless I was ever put in that situation.
No.
I never have been. I don't think I will be, unless, you know, there's a drastic change tomorrow morning. I doubt if that's going to happen. But I don't. One thing I've never understood is prejudice, ever.
But it comes in so many. It's insidious. It's
wrong.
It is, but it's something that we're all guilty of.
Yeah.
And we all need to recognize it and own it. And I include myself in that. You know, and it's something that doesn't sit comfortably with me, but I've been pulled up many a times on what I've said and how I've said it, or what assumptions I've made. I continue to do it to this day. And of course, that's regrettable, but we need to try and be better, because the impact of trans hate is something that we need to accept. Most of the people that I have spoken to over the last 5 years, say, have had their lives absolutely devastated, have had their life chances reduced phenomenally, not because they're trans, but because they are constantly unvalidated. They're constantly questioned, they're constantly discriminated against, constantly judged. I know that. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen what happens when somebody takes all their courage to go out of the front door and somebody misgenders them or makes a comment that's banter.
Mhm.
I mean, Paul might remember not less than 5 years ago, 3 years ago, when I was out with some friends locally, and we were just 3 women on a Friday, gone to see an event in Wellingborough, and we were talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the drink after the performance, and basically minding our own business, talking about the things that we wanted to talk about. Nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with trans issues, just catching up. One of my friends is a trans woman, and a man, a cis man, came up to us, we were sitting at the bar, and said, "Excuse me, mate, are you a bloke?" Now, I don't know if I can describe to you the effect that that had. To this day, that has affected my friend, right? To this day, the way it was handled by the police has affected my friend and me and our other friend who was with us. And nobody in that room did enough to protect us at the time. They might not have known what to do, but I had to threaten to throw that man over the banister if he didn't walk away and take his drink with him. And people just do not know how to react. And this man kept coming and kept coming. "Don't be so touchy, mate. I'm only asking, are you a bloke?"
Cool.
Now, that doesn't happen to me all the time because I'm a cis woman. That happens to my trans friends, my trans family, and people who are read as trans all the time. I can remember a family member phoned me from St Pancras because she was getting a train, she was waiting for a train, she was sitting in a cafe, and she just wanted me to hear what was going on in that cafe. And what was going on was 2 respectable looking, middle-aged white people, a couple, telling my family member that she was disgusting and should be put up against a wall and shot. Nobody did a thing. And I was on the phone and I said, she was on her own. Nobody did a thing. I could tell you so many stories. Maybe 5 years ago, there was a young girl in Northampton, a young trans woman who hung herself. And I sat down and I looked at everything that had been in the media, in the paper, on the TV that year. And I looked at everything that she would have had to have seen. I had listened to her stories of being at a bus stop with her friends and a taxi driver telling her that he wasn't going to take her anywhere. And she was 21 and it was ruled suicide. Nothing on that, nothing exists anywhere to say that society attitudes to transgender people or non-binary people had anything to do with her death.
Marlene, could I perhaps just, I mean, you're clearly very passionate, and this may be, I'm being a bit patronizing here, that you may want a bit of a break.
No, honestly, I'm absolutely fine.
You're all right. I mean,
yeah.
I just wondered whether, because normally after about an hour we have a break anyway, and whether you wanted to have a break.
Well, you all
and
might
then we come back. Sorry. Sorry.
You all might want to have a break from listening.
Well, what we do, I mean, it allows people to just go and get a drink or what have you,
no problem.
and just to chill for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back and perhaps follow up with some additional questions and points and what have you. But it just gives you a bit of space.
Get a cup of tea.
And there's a bit of space. Get a cup of tea.
Get a cup of tea.
It's a very good English tradition.
Absolutely.
Paul,
Got to be done.
Yeah, Tony. Yeah.
After the break, I'm just thinking, and I'm ever so sorry about not appearing in person, but just to shift things just a little bit, I just wondered whether we could explore something about trans people and protected characteristics and legal protection. And I'm just wondering, I'm just leaving that as a thought, that is there adequate, does the law as it stands, so sort of stereotype people into male or female, that actually it leaves little recognition to protect trans people? And I'm also quite interested because I read an article recently about the trans unit at the Maudsley, I think, for young people, and the sort of controversies that surrounded the working of that unit, with it being very much a focus of because these things are very polarizing, and
this is the use of hormone treatment, isn't it?
So you've got you had in that unit, it had a big focus on whether those interventions, how for example, how quickly young people might be able to declare themselves, which I think is a whole area itself, isn't it? About people defining for themselves, and a very traditional view.
It's about also consenting for treatment, wasn't it, for children?
Yeah, that's right. But I think, there's some things behind it that are, challenging a very sort of strict demarcations that continue to, be reinforced by society at large. Cup of tea.
Cup of tea time, and then we come back. So I'm going to switch off recording. So if we come back. Hi everybody, and welcome back to part 2 of ISW's meeting on trans issues with Marlene Ballantyne. So yeah, Tony, did you want to repeat the question that you asked before the end of the last session? It's about the legal position, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, I think so. So to do with, Well, different countries seem to have taken different positions. There seems to be a position in Scotland where people can themselves define themselves as trans, which I think is possibly the beginning of some sort of means of then being able to be, you can define yourself then, and then in a sense you can say if you're the subject of trans hate. If, however, the position stands as it is in England, it sounds as if the Tories are very much intent on maintaining some sort of medical definition where you have to say you're male or female, and that a doctor will basically confirm that. And possibly there's some other bit of leeway, but it's only by means of a medical registration. So that's one thing. Are the protections, are the protected characteristics, do they extend far enough? And the other thing was just sharing this reading about the huge sort of political controversies around the Maudslay's trans unit for transforming young people, which really became in the subject of a lot of vested interest from either side, intervening to say, you know, whether young people's rights, how they should be responded to. Highly controversial. And of course, I don't think we could end the evening without the controversy between feminists and people in the trans unit, trans movement, sorry. You know, again, about, to some extent, about, you know, being a woman as being able to, you know, begin the process of actually campaigning about, you know, against misogyny and stuff like that. And there seems to be in the feminist movement, and there's some sort of idea that the trans movement might threaten or water down the achievements of the women's movement.
Marlene, do you want to?
Well, there are quite a few things that you mentioned there. Which one should we start with?
Let's go with the legal bit first.
So the legal side of self-identification as far as your gender goes. Is that what?
I think as a protected characteristic.
So your gender identity as a protected characteristic. Okay, so the law says that you, well, are you talking about the Equalities Act?
Let's go with that first.
Yeah, so the Equalities Act says that you shouldn't be discriminated against on the grounds of blah, 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 blah.
Gender
and
reassignment.
Gender identity. Yeah, it says gender reassignment, which is a strange wording. But yes, that's what the Equalities Act says. Are you asking whether it does enough?
I think so.
Okay, so the fact that it says gender reassignment can mean a million different things. So there are so many stages and options for somebody who transitions. If a woman is discriminated against because she is a trans woman, the law says that she will be protected. Is that right?
Right.
If I could perhaps chip in here, I've always understood the position to be that the Equalities Act protects people who are trans, self-defined, irrespective of whether they're in the process of actually transitioning physically from one gender to another in terms of their sex.
Yeah.
They're nevertheless protected under the Equality Act. There are, though, some exceptions or exemptions from the Equality Act, which causes confusion in relation to single-sex spaces, and enables, and that's where part of the controversy, at least with some feminists, or has arisen in terms of, but essentially, but the bottom line is that the Equalities Act protects people from discrimination, and certainly in terms of harassment, the legal position in terms of harassment and the police and the CPS is that somebody who's harassed because they are trans by self-definition, then that is quite clearly taken very seriously and maybe taken very seriously, or maybe taken very. The legal position is that it should be taken seriously and should be prosecuted.
Yeah.
Not in practice, that's not always the case, as we know.
No, it's definitely not the case.
Does that help, Tony?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
So, Tony, were you asking about, because you talked about trans hate and you talked about the feminist movement?
Yeah.
And Paul, you mentioned single-sex spaces.
Yeah.
So if we think about, so the law says if I identify as a woman, I shouldn't be discriminated against that, whether I'm a trans woman or a cis woman.
Right.
Yeah. And that is the law. The law says a lot of things that and trans people aren't protected by the law. That is a fact.
Okay.
Trans people are not protected by the law because the law itself doesn't understand the issues. The people who enforce the law don't understand the issues.
Right.
Trans hate, you don't have to be trans to be a victim of trans hate. I've been a victim of trans hate.
Right.
In the same way, you don't have to be black to be a victim of racism against black people. You'll experience it a different way, but you can still be a victim. The feminist movement has become quite divided. So we've got, I assume you mean people like Kathleen Stock,
Yes.
who recently handed in a notice at University of Sussex because I believe she said it was problematic calling or trans women to identify as lesbian. Or you've got somebody like Linda Bellos, who was gender critical about trans women calling themselves women. Or Germaine Greer.
J.K. Rowling's.
J.K. Rowling's, yeah. So I don't even know where to start with those people. They're probably people that certainly Germaine Greer and Linda Bellos have been heroes of mine, and J.K. Rowling. I didn't really know much about Kathleen Stock at the time, but I think the danger is with some of these people is that they theorize things that affect people's lives. It's one thing having an academic discussion,
Right.
but you have to have a responsible attitude for it, in exactly the same way that when we discuss racism, and when we discussed racism back in the 70s or the 50s or whenever, some arguments are philosophical, some arguments are academic, and we can all play devil's advocate. But there needs to come a point where we understand that the mass media isn't the place to have that discussion, because most people who will be consumers of that mass media won't have the academic understanding and context, and that argument will be taken out of context. Now, I reserve the right to not enter into any gender critical discussion, because to me, I'm not interested. If I'm in a women's space, and I'm in a women's space with other women, I don't really care what their journey was to becoming a woman. If I was in a women's space with a bloke who was pretending to be a woman to play devil's advocate, I would find that unacceptable and really stupid, but totally unacceptable, because trans women aren't blokes pretending to be women. Trans women are women. There's a massive difference. Yeah. I had an incident locally with somebody who I had known for quite a long time, who was politically sound, I thought, until we had a discussion. Well, she approached me with a discussion with a few things that she wanted to ask me, and she was telling me about a festival that she'd been to in Wales, and it was a women's festival. This is an intelligent woman that I'm talking about, this person that I had a conversation with. And there was an individual there who said she was a trans woman, but went around flashing her genitalia and making lewd suggestions at other members who were there. So I suggested that she call the police and report that person, because what they were doing was not okay. And I don't care if it's a trans woman, a cis woman, or especially if it's a bloke pretending to be a woman. In my experience, trans women will enter women's spaces if they are safe spaces. And I know that I don't feel safe in some women's spaces because of attitudes. So I won't go into those spaces because of the transphobic, gender critical stuff that I hear. So when you're talking about single sex spaces, I don't understand what they're for. If you're gonna say a woman's space is a space where people who were born with vulvas can go, then that means trans men can go to those women's meetings. That means Fox Fisher can go and turn up with his big old beard, and he's a very good looking guy. But is it okay for him to go? into those women's spaces? Is it okay for him? But it's not okay for somebody who actually identifies as a woman. I don't particularly understand women's spaces that exclude trans women. I don't understand, and I wouldn't be a part of any group,
Right.
women's
Yeah.
group, that did not accept my trans sisters and family, and on the basis that they weren't born with vulva.
Thanks.
Could I perhaps add a perspective on this? I mean, there's somebody who I know who's worked for donkey's years in women's aid refuges. She says she's never come across a scenario where a man has pretended to be a woman in order to gain access to a women's aid refuge. And there'd be no problem, as far as she was concerned, in a trans woman gaining access to the women's aid refuge where she'd worked. She said there was plenty of women who behaved absolutely appallingly in the women's aid refuge. And if a trans woman behaved appallingly, they'd be treated exactly the same as any other woman who behaved appallingly in their refuge. And
Yeah.
they'd be either kicked out or what have you. But the issue of their trans status is not a reason to exclude people who may have penises but identify as trans women from coming into their women's aid refuge if they were facing abuse and needed a sanctuary. And she's appalled at the suggestion that the stereotype that there's loads of men out there who want to dress up as women. That's not to mean to say there aren't some. There was a case of a guy in Corby who was prosecuted precisely for doing that, but they weren't trans, although they claimed
There's
to
a
be.
difference.
But you know, those people will be prosecuted for their behaviour, not who they are.
Absolutely. And as I said to
And that's exactly the same for black people, you know, disabled people, anyone with the protected characteristics. If they behave out of order, they're out of order.
Totally. And that's what I said to this woman who was telling me about you need to phone the police and report them because it's abusive behaviour.
But
dangerous.
but to deny trans women access to women's spaces is discrimination against trans people.
Exactly. And the thing is, this is something that is often touted, that that men will do these things for devious reasons, but there's no statistics to back it up. Because I'd love to see it. I'd love to meet some of these people who pretend they're women to access women's spaces and do harm. And it's something that trans exclusionary feminists will often tout, but there are no stats to back it up. And I have searched, I've looked, because I'd love to see them. I've never found any statistics. There are a lot of statistics where trans women have suffered because of discrimination when they've attempted to use single space women's spaces. And again, there's probably even, you know, you don't know if somebody's trans. There are a lot of trans women who use women's spaces that, well, if you don't know they're trans, should they still not be there? Or is there there's no way to police it?
I want to complain about all those women historically, all those women who've dressed up as men historically in order to invade male spaces. People like George Eliot.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Shocking.
terrible, isn't it? Shocking. You know, as men need to gang up to keep these women who want to access our privileges as men.
Equality, that sort of thing.
Could I ask what may appear to be a stupid question?
Fine, we like stupid questions.
Because I've got no, not that I'm aware of, experience very much of the trans world, but are there trans women and trans men who are quite happy with their physical appearance and don't want to change things, but want to behave because they feel that they are the opposite to what their gender tells them what they are? Or do
Yes, there's a word that's used. I don't know if any of you have read Nella Larson's book Passing, but that's the same in a lot of different areas. And there has been and continues to be a lot of judgment about whether somebody passes as a woman or as a man, and that is all to do with gender expression. And again, I think it's a red herring, and it's generational. It can be generational as well. Like I said before, I am more than happy on some days to wear no makeup. I've had my hair really short, and nobody has ever accused me of not being a proper woman. But if a trans woman decides that she wants to wear combat trousers and have short hair, there's a lot of judgment from cis people and within the trans community itself that she isn't trying hard enough. And it's unfair because cis women don't particularly have that levied at them. Nobody has ever said, oh, you're not trying hard enough to be a woman. They might say, cool, you look a bit rough today. But it's you know, my friends are women, my trans female friends are women, whether they've got makeup on, whether they need a shave, whether they've, you know, they're still who they are. But that is a difficulty within the trans community itself, as well as with other people who are quite judgmental about whether it's called passing privilege. And to be fair, a lot of younger trans people aren't gonna have the same judgment, because the younger you transition, the less likely you are to develop masculine characteristics that only intensive surgery can remove. It doesn't matter what, once you've developed those if a 60-year-old man, cis man, is going to have to work a lot harder to pass as a woman. Whereas a 21-year-old woman who was assigned male at birth, see, cis, you know, it can be complex. I make mistakes. Probably won't develop those characteristics because they will have transitioned younger, and the hormones will stop those things developing, those characteristics developing. You know, the larger forehead, the broader chin, the Adam's apple. So some women who transition late in life will find it more difficult to pass, I guess, than people who transition nearer to puberty when they haven't, you know.
Is that one of the arguments that is around the younger under 16-year-olds wanting to transition, And
Well,
the
I think
is that in a sense, the younger you transition, the more effective the transition can be in terms of
yeah. So when you're talking about transition,
and both.
I don't know anybody who has transitioned medically as a child. The best that you can hope for is hormone blockers, which arrests the onset of puberty until you are of an age where you can make that decision with some degree of certainty. But it is, I've done some work with infants and junior schools with children who've wanted to transition socially. And my view is, if a child wants to change their name, that's not irreversible. If that child wants to grow their hair long and wear ponytails and a dress to school, that's not irreversible. And the schools that I've worked at, the biggest issue, I've said to the school, they're not going to have to do anything. They're not going to get hormones when they are still children. I know people who are in their 20s going into their 30s who've been on the waiting list for such a long time. It's not a quick process, and for somebody to live in their preferred gender, what's the problem? If they decide a couple of years down the line that actually I'm not a girl, I think I'm non-binary, that's fine as well. There's no contract to sign that says you can't go back. And there's no contract to sign that says, I had one teacher concerned because the child who identified as female wanted to come in trousers and still play football. And the teacher was concerned that child was confused. The child isn't confused. They just want to wear trousers and play football. And that is also okay. There's nothing to say that if you transition socially, if you want to change your name to a feminine name, that you can't change it back. It's us that give us that give that anxiety that, you can't call yourself a girl because what if you change your mind? That's okay, change your mind. Who cares?
Marta, I noticed earlier that you had your hand up. Did you want to, sorry, I didn't pull you in earlier.
No, earlier on, I don't know what was said, but I mean, we've talked a lot about being a woman, feeling like a woman, expressing oneself like a woman, or passing like a woman. I mean, I'm just wondering if we need a definition. What is it to be a woman?
I'm a woman.
So am I, but what is it?
And we're both very different. A woman is a million different things.
Right. I suppose that what's at the back of my mind is the fact that I know that in some parts of the world, there are laws and regulations and so on, where the language is being changed. And there are people who are concerned about the category woman disappearing. I mean, I'm just intrigued. I want to find out, I want to learn about these things.
Absolutely.
Confusing. And I mean, some of the phrases that are used, I mean, definitely the word woman has disappeared. And
it's disappeared.
Yes, because they talk about individuals with a uterus or whatever. They talk about individuals, that they do not use the word woman.
Who?
In Argentina and parts of Spain, in different places. So, yeah, I mean,
who's doing that? Who's saying you can't use the word woman, Martha? Is it the state?
they're not actually saying that you cannot use the word woman, but in documents and in law and so on, the word is disappearing, has disappeared. They do not use the word woman.
This sounds a little bit like, I mean, if I could use the analogy, sorry to interrupt, Marlene, it's very similar to some of the arguments that you keep hearing every Christmas, that the word Christmas has disappeared. There are certain people that have an agenda where they want to see these words disappear, so they can say that this is, you know, we moved into a woke, politically correct society, and yet nobody actually is wanting them to disappear, but they have an interest in saying that, you know, this such and such local authorities abolished the word Christmas, and you can now got to use the word Winterval or something. And yet you go to the local authority and nobody's actually ever said that. But it's been in the Daily Mail, of course, or the Daily Express or something, that local authorities want to abolish Christmas. And I would like to know a bit more about who these people are that are suggesting that the word woman or man or whatever has disappeared or should disappear or what have you, because I'm not aware of anyone ever saying this.
I couldn't get hold of, but I have read it and I have seen it.
But what's their agenda, Marta, for saying this? That it's got to go. What's their agenda?
I don't know, but these are government laws or directives. Yes.
I'd love to know more about that.
That sounds like the local government officer
No.
who suddenly says that we've got to use the word Winterval instead of Christmas.
No, this is national. I need to find it.
Well, I would totally rebel against that, because nobody's going to tell me that I'm not a woman.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
Roy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure some of this stuff out. All sorts of things flash through my mind when different issues come up. I mean, I'm reminded of Aldous Huxley and Brave New World, categorization, and milk producers and test tube babies and so on, fusion between, or incompatibilities between technology and biology sometimes. But coming back to the point that's just been raised, I mean, surely there could be a category of people who don't identify with either the traditional male model or the traditional female model. I mean, presumably there are people who feel comfortable in either camp. You know, there's always a spectrum. You know, some males are far more quote marks macho than others, and some women are far more quote marks feminine end of quotes than others. You know, so this whole subject's quite fascinating, but complicated. Is there a category of people who are neither one or the other and are content with that categorization?
Yes,
definitely. There are a lot of people who don't identify specifically as male or female. They are, you may have heard the words gender fluid, non-binary gender, genderqueer. There are a lot of people, and I must say, I totally understand that thought that actually, why should I choose? Why should I call myself one thing if I don't really identify with it? is that, you know, that's why we do need to self-identify, and there are a lot of people who do not identify specifically as male or specifically as female, and that's okay. That shouldn't be an issue. But language is, you know, it can be politicized. It often is politicized, and you know, it's like you, Marta, you were saying about words being outlawed. I haven't seen any evidence ever to suggest that it is not okay to say I'm a boy or I am a girl if that is who you feel to be. And I would, I mean, there was some controversy about a school in Brighton who outlawed, well, this is the popular press interpreted, outlawed children calling each other, calling themselves boy or girl, and everybody was just a person. I don't think that didn't happen, for one. That wasn't true. You know, toy aisles not allowed to be girl or boy. I think because those terms are exclusive, not all women have uteruses. Some women have periods. Some women go through menopause because they were born with uteruses. Some men were also born with uteruses, and they have periods, and they will go through the menopause, but they're men. And I think, not to say that being a woman should be outlawed, but some of these conditions that we think of that affect women, they also affect men, because trans men have periods. So rather than say we're not allowed to say woman, it's about understanding that not everybody who has periods is a woman.
I wasn't saying that that it was outlawed to be a woman or to be a boy or a girl or whatever. No, I wasn't saying that. What I was that in legal documents, the word woman was not being used as an attempt to be inclusive, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's okay.
Yes, but there was concern on sectors of the population about that.
Well, this is a bit like chairperson as opposed to chairman or chairwoman. Is it that you know, if you want to abolish the use of the word chairman or chairwoman, everyone should use the word chairperson? Is that the sort of thing that was? So in legal documents, they were removing the historic gendered nature of legal documents, for example.
Yes.
Nearly every law in the United Kingdom talks about men. Doesn't talk about women. So, and that's been historic. But ever since, you know, British Parliament passed laws, there was no reference to women in any of the legislation. But what's happened people are now suggesting that legislation should become gender neutral, which seems to be perfectly proper, actually.
Yeah, and it's like,
so that's what might be happening in Spain and Argentina, Mark. If it's legal documents people are talking about, it's not that they're not abolishing the use of the word women, they're abolishing the use of the word man and woman.
Yeah.
But some people are interpreting it as they're abolishing women. You know, we're going to write women out of history. And no, they're writing out of history the gendered nature of language in the legal profession.
Well, it's like the toy aisle that had all the controversy. You're not allowed to have a girls' aisle and a boys' aisle, which I agree with. Toys are toys. If you want to play with a Barbie and you know, in a pink Barbie caravan and you're a boy, you shouldn't have to go to the girls aisle. You should just go to the toys aisle where the Barbies are and the pink caravan. And if you're a girl and you want to play with them, then you shouldn't feel any shame about being a girl who loves pink and ribbons. That is also fine.
And all the footballs are in the boys' aisle.
Exactly. It is exclusive. It's, you know, in the same way as, you know, what we were talking about earlier, that, I mean, I wrote a letter yesterday, a cover letter, and I didn't want to put Dear Sir or Madam.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, what do we put? I didn't see that as a problem, because I want to be inclusive. And if the person that is going to receive my letter does not identify as male or female, that's going to hit them in the face, because actually, what about me? So there are quite a few legal firms who are now saying, we're not going to use Dear Sir or Madam because it's exclusive.
Just to remind you, we've got 2 minutes left, approximately. I'm not going to be rigid on time, but I'm just drawing your attention to the fact that we are perhaps short to think about winding up. Roy, I saw your finger up.
Yeah, well, move suspension of standing orders, Paul. What I would bring into it at a late stage is a class dimension. As a product of conservative rural Northamptonshire, yeah, anybody who was slightly different was a threat and had the mickey taken out on them, discrimination. It was deeply embedded into the system. And of course, there's culture lag. You know, people are in some ways slowly evolving into what we might regard as a more positive position. But there's still a hell of a lot of people who are incredibly conservative. Now, it seems to me that in the vanguard of progress towards a more egalitarian setup and a more tolerant setup, it's the better educated, and I'm loath to use that word, as you know, better educated people who've had the benefit of coming into contact with a wider range of people and so on, who are those that are, you know, pushing forward with a progressive, for want of a better term, a progressive agenda. So there is a hell of a lot of culture lag, you know, and you talk about how the police can't deal with it. Well, of course, they're deeply embedded in a conservative part of British society, you know, so it's a long drawn out process. There's so much culture lag right across the spectrum. And those people who've had the benefit of mixing with other people and being boat marks educated, you know, they're now the target, wokeism and all that, the target of the people who are resenting this progressive thing. So, you know, this is multifaceted, and it seems to me that the trans situation, you know, it is a product of all sorts of cultural changes, all sorts of toings and froings across the political spectrum, and you know, there is this huge rump of negative opinion that's there. How you get around that, I don't know, but in my view, you know, the trans thing is something that fits into a much wider political dimension, unfortunate as that might be. But you've got to sort out the class connotation, unfortunately, before, you know, they make the dramatic steps that are required.
So anybody who's not spoken, Karen, Sue, did you want to say, Sue? Yeah.
I mean, what I'd say is I think it's a remarkable difference between not even just my generation, but my children's generation and my grandchildren's generation. I mean, my grandchildren must know 5 or 6 trans children, both ways, trans boys and trans girls. And to them, it's part and parcel of life. And I don't know whether they're still being bullied at school in the same way, but it really is completely different. I don't think that even my children knew any trans people until, you know, they got much older. But even this is at primary schools, at secondary schools, you've got children who are changing their names, who are dressing differently, and the other children just seem to accept it. I don't know whether Marlene would say that's really true.
I think it is true, and I think it's the older generation and the adults that are around who cause the issues.
Mm.
As do dinosaurs always, and that's not a criticism. That is a fact. It's our insecurities. It's not a trans issue. This isn't what we've been talking about tonight. Is not a trans issue. It is a cis issue.
Mm.
We have the problem. We are the problem. Trans people have always existed. They always will. Whether we understand them or not doesn't make any difference. Trans people have been here since people were invented. Well, not invented, but you know what I mean. And they will continue to be here. The only change is that I hope we are starting to be more inclusive and creating safer spaces, but we're not doing enough. This is not a trans issue. This is a cisgender issue.
Karen, did you have anything? Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, just briefly, as someone who's interested in languages, it seems to me that the language isn't there yet to accommodate all these different issues, and it needs to develop, although it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Until people's ideas clarify, perhaps the language, I don't know if the language needs to be put in place first and everybody adjusts, or the other way round. That's a bit of a conundrum to throw at you.
Yeah, chicken and egg comes to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is an issue that we can only understand by doing what we've done this evening. And we need to be better advocates. We need to make safer spaces in all communities, in faith communities, cultural communities. We need to, this is something that we have to do. You know, white people had to change the way the country was to make it safer for Black people to be able to join in. We didn't have the power to do that. It was people like young Paul there who was instrumental in shouting very loudly and creating a safe space. And that's what we need to do, even if we don't always get it right, because we won't. We need to create a space where it is okay to talk about it, and it is okay to have respectful discussions. And we need to just remember that this isn't an academic argument. This is affecting people's lives. People die around the world because they are trans.
I think that's a moment to perhaps start to conclude. I'm going to just make an observation, if I may, following up something that Roy said earlier, that this issue needs to also be seen in a wider context, which we haven't really looked at, I don't think, but Roy kind of flagged that up too late. You ought to have said what you said earlier, Roy. I didn't notice until relatively recently that these kinds of issues were controversial up until the 90s, and certainly the turn of just after the turn of the century. Issues around race, gender, disability, all the protected characteristics seemed to be moving in the right direction, and something's happened in the past 10 to 15 years that has put that into reverse. And I've got a sneaky feeling it has something to do with the economic crisis that occurred 10, 15 years ago, and the response by ruling elites that they suddenly had to invent the culture wars and to wind back the progress that was starting to be made. So the emergence of Bolsonaro in Brazil, Trump in America, the Thatcher, and later on, you know, Johnson and May here, in Poland, in Hungary, in Israel, in India, across the world, there's a reaction emerging, which is really dangerous, and it's attacking on all fronts, on the issue of trans issues, women's rights, in black people's rights, and I think that's part of a political project by the far right. So there's a wider political context here, and I feel increasingly quite depressed about how things are being unwritten, despite the fact, I think, Sue, you're absolutely right. Younger people, despite the politicians at the top who are moving to the right, younger people are actually leading irrespective of what's happening with these bastards at the top. They're growing up in a society which they're increasingly aware is diverse and what have you, and are far more tolerant. The danger is that could be very easily unwind if these bastards really gain political control. But that's just me being very depressed. Any final comments other than what I've just said? Marlene, did you want to say anything more? And Sue, Marta, Roy, and or do we wind up?
Well, I would just like to say that I totally agree with what you're saying, Paul, and I think that there is a political agenda that drives a lot of what we've been talking about this evening. And that's something that we need to be aware of. But on a community level, there's an awful lot that we can do as members of the local community to make things safer and not look the other way. And something that my South African apartheid generation mum used to say, and her even older Jamaican friend used to say, is that respect comes first, understanding can grow, but we have to be respectful of each other's differences and not devalue somebody because we don't understand an aspect.
Excellent. I'm going to close the meeting here and thank formally on behalf of ISW to thank you, Marlene, for your contribution. Derek, can we assume we make the usual donation to QTiP? I'm sure, Marlene, you'd welcome.
I go deaf when you say things like that, Paul.
Derek, by the way, Marlene, is our treasurer, and I always defer to him on matters to do with finance. But we do have a tradition of making donations to
absolutely.
Groups,
you just give me the details. Yeah.
Yeah, so Marlene, if you email me your bank details for QTiP, not your personal, well, you can do, I don't mind but for QTiP, your bank details, and we'll make a bank transfer. And so as a formal recognition of our thanks to you and the work that you do, and wish you well.
Much appreciated, thank you.
No problem. So
and on that any donations go straight into the trans community directly. They do not pass go.
Right, excellent, excellent. So no problem. That's brilliant. So that'll be sorted out within the next few days if you let us know the details.
Absolutely.
So on behalf of ISW, again, formally, many thanks, and we're all on Zoom, unmuted, so we can all clap and it'll be loud and clear. Or wherever. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. Thank you all for starting this conversation, and it's one that we need to continue, and if I can help it in any way with that, great. Always. Okay, so the next ISW meeting, just to remind you, is Thursday, February the 24th, so fourth Thursday of the month. So see you then. Remember, it's this link, same link every time. Okay.
Okay, thanks very much.
Cheers then, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.